Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fiore Calls Game. We have a very, very special edition here. We've been advertising this one for a while. Thorr Bjorn, who, when we set up this interview, was the athletic director of the University of Rhode Island, now is heading back to his alma mater to oversee the UMass football program as well as other tasks there. We're going to welcome him on now. Thorr, great to see you again, even though it's in different colors.
Andrew, it's so good to see you again as well. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course. Now, it made headlines that you were switching over a bit unexpectedly to go back to UMass, but to those who know you, really no surprise that you would want to head to the Minutemen, considering your long, long tenure there.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny. This is my third time coming back here to UMass, and it is a special place and a special place to me. I and my wife both are alums here, and having this chance to come back and work primarily with football and Joe Harry Simiak, who I've known for a long time, and Ryan Bamford, who I've also been a great friend for a long time, and just really excited. It's been in the first 2 months have been pretty great.
That's great to hear. How has that adjustment been? You said it's been great so far, but was there any bit of a transition, or were you able to just fit right back in where you were?
I think there's always transition. I wouldn't be being honest with you if I didn't say there wasn't. And I think the biggest thing is coming from being an athletic director for the past 18 and a half years and really being the new person, even though again it's the third time coming back here to UMass, there's a whole new team in place, amazing people. And so navigating that and really it didn't take long and really I think within a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, really felt comfortable and confident in terms of assessments and thought things that I thought maybe should be focus areas of focus on. But then the other thing, Andrew, that I thought was really cool is, in a lot of ways, there's things that need to be worked on, but there's things that are working very well, and really, getting a good sense of that too. So.
What are some of those things that you say are working very well that attracted you to return to Amherst?
I Yeah, I'll tell you the biggest thing, and I was talking every football recruiting visit I had, meeting with guys that were here either through the transfer portal or through the high school process. I sort of told them the same thing. It's like, look, there were decisions made by the chancellor, by the board of trustees, by Ryan Bamford that I think were critically important to giving the football program and putting it on a solid footing to be able to go do what we all ultimately want to do, and that's, compete for a MAC championship. Well, let's start by getting into a league. The fact that that hard work was done and that decision was made a year or two ago, I give a lot of credit to those folks I just mentioned because that is a hard decision, especially when you've been in the Atlantic 10, a basketball centric league for so many years. But I don't believe I give all the credit in the world to the success UConn had last year or 2 years ago as a FBS program. I think it's really hard to be competitive and successful as an independent, unless you're Notre Dame. I mean, they've been doing it for years and they've got a heck of a brand. Again, I want to make sure that I say UConn's had a great couple of years. I give them all the credit, but I think getting into a league was critically important. They did that. That's huge. Then I sit back and say, okay, making sure that people don't have to like the world of NIL. Well, that's critically important to whether or not we're going to be successful now. And so making sure that as an institution, we've budgeted properly to put together, near the top of the MAC, an NIL structure that'll allow us to be competitive. And then lastly, which probably I should have said first, is alignment. When I think about, alignment at most recently at URI, it's, kind of having that understanding with the board of trustees that is relatively new to Mark Parlance, who's in his fifth year, but he really helped us and make some really important strategic investments around athletics, around football, and that is a you can direct correlation to success. And so when I think about that alignment here at UMass, again with the board of trustees, the chancellor Reyes, Brian, Joe Harrisimiak. That's exciting. And without all those things in place, I don't think you can be successful. So, Andrew, when I think back to, sort of sitting back, and I've shared this publicly since I've been here, it's easy for me to do probably as a former player and not being part of some of, what Ryan inherited. John McCutcheon, who made the move to FBS football, is a great friend of mine and someone who was a mentor. And I know why he was told to do it, but also that he wasn't then funded properly to be successful at it. And then Ryan, continued to battle the battle as an independent and trying to make it work. But when I think about where we are now compared to where we were 10 years ago or even 2 years ago, it gets me excited. So long-winded answer to your question. I think those factors are huge to what I hope will be a successful run for us. I'm confident. I've been through some challenging football seasons, certainly at Rhode Island early on in my time, but then I also got to see firsthand with a huge pride of where it could get to based upon all those other factors in place. It doesn't just magically happen, especially with a football program. It's so massive, it's so big, and it's so complicated, but you need to have all those alignments in place.
What to you makes the MAC seem like such a good fit for UMass?
I think we can be competitive in it. It's very good football. It's very good football. But when I look at our budget, because again, you got to evaluate your budget, you got to evaluate your NIL programming structure, funding model, and we're not going out and trying to compete at the funding level, at the resource level as a Big Ten or SEC or Big 12 program or ACC program. But we are funded to be competitive in the MAC and against our peers. And that's great football. We've played against a lot of those teams during my time at Rhode Island and even my time previously at UMass as an FBS opponent. So I think, we have the ability to be competitive. Yeah, we weren't competitive this year like we would have liked to have been, but um, I think for all those reasons, access to a bowl game, access to conference schedule of 8 games, it's huge. In the past, Andrew, I left out a big part of this. We were scheduling games to really fund our program. Playing an independent schedule is hard, and then you trying to get 2 or 3 BCS level opponents to really offset budgets. That's what Ryan inherited. That wasn't his strategy. And that was what John McCutcheon was forced to do when he made the move. Those things aren't in play now. Now, will we go play in a BCS program? Yeah, that's cool. That's fun. It's a cool opportunity and it's a cool experience. But that's not the funding model needed to run your program.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it seemed like UMass was doing tons of those per year, but scaling it back and looking at more feasible opponents, I think, is a smart idea. And there was something else you mentioned before that I want to get to, and that was funding. You said there was a direct correlation between funding and success. And UMass just got a $30,000 grant for its athletics, namely renovating the stadium. Besides the stadium, how do you look to use that money to try to get UMass football back to relevance?
Sure, actually $30 million. And so there's a different phases of
30 million.
utilization for that.
I said
Yeah.
that and I was like, that's not right.
I didn't mean to call you out, but
That
it was
sounded
such a
weird
big
off the
difference. I
tongue.
figured I had to. Well, there's actually phases of how that's going to be utilized. And some of it's going to be absolute requirements. For example, we have to do some ADA seating adjustments at the stadium. So that's got to get done, and that'll be a part of it. We're going to put ribbon wrap in around the stadium, which I think will be really nice, and that'll make a big difference for us, and a new sound system. Because when I think about just the fan experience, you got to make sure that you're not blowing people out of the water, but they can also clearly hear what the announcers are saying, what the music's playing, etc. So those things are going to be phase one. That'll be getting done. Most of that hopefully before next season. Phase two is going to be a lot of aesthetics, and that'll be nice. It's funny, Andrew, when I came to a game, the last home game of the year this year, I was here early and I walked out on the field, and it was a field I played on. And I'm looking around, and I said to myself, this place is great. It's not our problem. This is not our problem. Those other factors that I already mentioned that were addressed were the biggest part of our problem. Now, that said, I'm not going to kid myself to say that we don't want to enhance what we have, and we need to do that. And Ryan and some of the folks on campus put together a really cool plan to phase this out over 2 or 3 cycles. And I don't mean that into a long, drawn out period, 3 years or whatever that'll be. So there'll be some really nice aesthetics because, we got to get it cleaned up, and I think that'll be helpful for recruiting. But where my office is, and you can kind of see right behind me, is the stadium, and we're overlooking the stadium in the football performance center. It's at first class. It's really amazing. It's very self-contained. Our weight room's here. We feed the guys here breakfast and lunch every day. Locker rooms are state of the art. Coaches' offices are great. So there's a lot of things that are in place to build upon.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I have only been there once, and that was actually when URI played UMass and beat them. And I believe I can't remember who the coach was for UMass, but he got fired the day of or the next day. But I
It was
remember
Walt
being
Bell. Yeah,
thinking
it
the
was.
stadium was nice.
Yeah, it was. I
Yeah, now
was
you're
at
on
that
the other
game
side of
too.
that.
It was a fun one to be on when I was on that side. Not fun, I'm sure, on the other side, but yeah, it was a cool experience. It made me smile. Obviously, you want to always win every game, and that one was special, obviously, because I coming from UMass at the time. So
What are you going to do about recruiting? How do you face the challenges of recruiting in the Northeast? I mean, it's not a new issue for you because you or I had the same issue, but the Northeast doesn't have the talent pool that the South has. So how are you going to go about finding the best players in the area and competing with schools like Rutgers and BC?
yeah, that's a great question. I think again, we don't recruit just in our backyard. Although you want to get all the best Massachusetts kids, you want them to come to the University of Massachusetts. So I know our staff is actively pursuing those guys. But we get kids from Maryland, Jersey, Florida, Texas, they're from all over. And I think we can never restrict that. So, finding, and then also the other thing about recruiting that isn't necessarily geography, but I thought was a really cool thing about philosophically what Coach Arasimiak put together is this current class that was just signed in December. There was 21 freshmen coming in here next year from all over, right? But in the past 3 years, we signed 21 freshmen combined. So why is that important? It allows us to go out and really attract and then develop kids to come in here and over 2 or 3 year period to allow them to grow within his structure, his organization, his culture. I think that's really important from a cultural building perspective. Now, again, I know the transfer portal, I know guys come and go all the time, but the thing that impressed me a lot this year was, at the end of the year, the coaches' evaluations, they did talk to a number of guys who after an 0-12 season, wanted to be here. They had the hard conversations. Every coach does that, where they, say, hey, if you want to play, you probably would need to think about someplace else. Those guys wanted to be here. That says a lot. And then backfilling that in with freshmen that want to be here, and culturally, we want to maintain them and keep them. That's really cool, and I think really important. And then you obviously then fill the rest of your class in through portal kids. And what a great group they went after. They knew their needs. They knew where they had to fill slots, and went out and got those bodies and those talents at skill level that I think will put us in position to be competitive. So I'm really thrilled. It's been a great process. What are we selling? We're selling, I think a great institution. We're selling a great coaching staff. We're selling the way we treat our guys and an opportunity to come in and compete for a championship. That's something we couldn't sell 2 years ago, and that's something we can sell now. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, so is your message directly to the players, either these incoming freshmen or maybe some players who will be returning from last year who went through the winless season? What is your message to them for what they can look forward to in terms of change?
Culture. Yeah, I know. I think it's funny when I sat down with Coach, actually before I even started, and here's the other thing about being the older guy now. It's funny, every time I've been here before, I've been the young guy. Now I'm the old guy. And I look at it as a realist. There's things to learn off from last year, but last year doesn't count. Why doesn't it count? That's important. That's not a cop out. That's not an excuse. It's a reality. So, Joe's hired December 1st, December 2nd, a year ago. And that was high school signing day. And then he puts a staff together, and now you're in the middle of the first transfer window. And then you've got to go out and try to coach your team and then you're in your next transfer window, and you're still trying to figure out, who you have, who's making up your program, who you are, etc. What got me excited when I started paying attention after Ryan had called me about this opportunity is he never wavered from his culture. He never wavered from what's important. And I think that's what those guys, why the guys are excited to come back and why these new guys wanted to be here. When you see Coach Harasimiak, he's a guy you want to play for. Coach Fleming said that to me. He goes, you know what? Joe's one of those guys, when I competed against him, I could tell his guys would run through a brick wall for him. And I said, no different than you, Coach. I mean, they're the same type of, player, personality, coach who loves them, but also sets standards and has a strong culture and expectation. So I think that will continue when I think about those guys and what they can come back to, knowing that they got a coaching staff that's gonna, hold firm on what's important, give them flexibility to come out here and play and compete. But then hold your teammates accountable as well. We didn't have a lot of guys getting in trouble academically. And now I got to clarify this. We had the best academic semester ever in the history of our football program, ever. Now, people will say the FBS level, I'll say forever, because it was a 3.1 GPA this fall from our football team. Why is that important? They didn't quit. When you're 0-12, if you've never been through it, it's so hard. And that's when character and culture kicks in. Those guys, as a team, to finish up with a 3.1 GPA during a tough time like that, where you're taking, scrutiny and under scrutiny and so forth, that tells me so much. That tells me about character. And that's what coach is all about. And so, again, that's just an outsider looking in initially. And when I think about all those different, facets of building a program and a culture, I just, like I said, I mentioned to coach whenever I see him, don't waver. Who you are is why guys want to be here and why you've been successful for a coach as a young coach. Um, can't ever leave those things. Too important.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to hear you mention academics, as that's a huge focus. They're student athletes. I've seen some complaints online about the price tag of the 30 million, not thousand million dollar grant that the school has gotten, um, saying that maybe it could have gone to dorms or something else like that. What is your argument to them to show why this is a worthwhile investment?
Great question. I wouldn't argue. I would say that this campus is amazing with incredible investments that have been made across the entire campus, academically in dormitories. I almost don't recognize the place. It was great when I was in school here. It was great when I worked here those other two times, but it's absolutely transformed. And when I think about the rankings of the institution and the majors and the amazing professors and the amazing people that make up this campus, everybody's worth it, but so is athletics. And when I think about the investments that are being made in the world we live in, as you know, $42 million going into to replace the Meade Stadium stands on the east side or west side, do my directions, east side. It's a lot of money, but it's funny, like you sit back and say $42 million doesn't really buy you a whole lot anymore. It's going to be beautiful. I'm not diminishing that. But when I think about cost, it's like things are expensive, especially when you're building them, when you got various codes and so forth to do. Look, we've been playing football here for 100 plus years, and we're going to play for another 100. And this stadium, it's probably the only thing around here that's older than me, but it is by a couple years, I think. And so it needs some work. There's this facility, this football performance center has been renovated. That's great. There's other things that need to be done to the stadium itself now. Great. Costs money. It's expensive. But you know what? We need to do it. No different than we would need to do other buildings on campus and make sure that they're at the standard that everybody expects at an institution like the University of Massachusetts. So, that doesn't mean we go crazy with how we spend. I think we're very smart. We're very fiscally responsible. Things do cost a lot of money. But I will never argue with anybody about their opinion about athletic facilities. It's just that if we're going to play Division I athletics and have 600 plus amazing student athletes representing us every year, not one time, every year, you got to do the best we can to make sure they have the facilities to go out and have the ability to be competitive.
You mentioned the Meat Stadium renovation, and I feel like the responses to that were overwhelmingly positive. People are excited. But it comes as Rhode Island won back-to-back conference championships and made the playoffs back-to-back times for the first time in 40 years. So there's a lot of optimism around the program. Are you finding more resistance to building up the team because of their 0-12 record? Are you
You know,
getting a lot of, well, why should we care? Apathy about the program, or are people inspired in that same way as they are at Rhode to keep building up, nowhere to go but up sort of
at
mentality?
Andrew, apathy is the best word you can use in terms of athletics when things aren't going right. And that's worse than anger. And that's worse than frustration, a lack of caring. Um, no, I think in talking to old teammates, I went and had dinner last week with two old teammates, actually three, one person that was a year out before I got there, but there's a lot of pride. There's a lot of pride, and we've won a lot of championships. When I got recruited here, again, it was at the FCS level. I remember coming here and looking at the brochure saying we've won more Yankee Conference games than anybody else. We won more Yankee Conference championships than anybody else. Again, that was a long time ago. I get it, but the program's won a national championship. It's lost twice in the national championship finals. Again, FCS level. I get it, but football's important here, and if we do it right, then we can get back to that place where there's real pride associated with it. I'm not embarrassed or scared to talk about the why. Why have we struggled? It's exactly what I said to you when we started the conversation. And I have to give all the credit in the world to Ryan, to the chancellor, to Kirsten Britton, to everybody that's been around this program that made these decisions to identify the why and fix them. And now we get to build. It's still here. We got a long way to go, but that solid foundation is built, and it's not a house of cards. So when I go around and talk about the football program, you know, I get excited because there is a new story to tell. There's a new story that hasn't been told now for 12 or 14 or 15 years. That's playing for a league championship. And you can't, if you've played football or any sport, you can't diminish the importance of that. And so do I think we can go out and win games? Yeah, I absolutely do. And do I think people will come out and get excited about watching football? No different than they did at Kingston, but if you're too young. But when I first got there, they weren't coming out. And even for the first 8 or 9 years when, I don't remember this. Coach Flem had a couple tough years to start. Coach Trainer had a couple tough years. Darren Rizzi, I think we were 3-8 when he was coaching, now coaching in the Super Bowl. Um, there's challenges. But what we did, and where I'm proud, is it took a while, is we identified the why. And then when we did that, we started making transformation. And and so I think when we start looking at, going out and winning a few games, which we know we have to do. I was telling when I was first talking to a donor, I'm sorry I'm rambling, when I was first talking to a donor at URI when he asked me, we talked a little bit about this opportunity, and he said, what, Thor, now you just have to go and execute. And that's the word I've been using a lot, where it's like, look, the university has stepped up, others have stepped up, and hard decisions have been made about moving out of a league you played in for a long time. Now we've got this. Now every one of us, every single person, not one person can be on the sideline, is we got to go execute. We got to attract players. We got to coach players. We got to make sure the barricades, if there are any, that are broken down, so our coaching staff and our players have the ability to be successful first in the classroom and then out in the field. We got to go out and do some real grassroots marketing initiatives to get the local community here to get excited again about coming out and watching our teams play. And we got to go win. I mean, winning is important. It's the best marketing tool there is. I mean, unless I'm sure there's other cool things too. Minor league baseball's figured it out. But in my opinion, at the college level, you got to go win. And when you can do that and you do that, people will come out. I believe that.
Has there been any thought to the idea of UMass going back down to FCS? I mean, that's a reality
Absolutely
I see.
not. Yeah, great question, but I want to jump on that before you could even finish asking. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think, you know, again, it comes down to the fact that, these investments now have been made and they're putting us in position to address the shortcomings and the challenges of the past. Does that mean we're going to go out and win 8 or 9 games this year? I hope so, but I've been doing this a long time, so I don't know how many we're going to win. But no, I think we're set up to be right where we should be, competing with the teams that we should be competing with, going out and attracting, I think, really talented players that want to play at the FBS level, and then having a coaching staff that's talented enough to coach them up. So, no, great question, but no, I feel like we're exactly where excuse me, I know we're exactly where we need to be.
Do you think things would have gone differently if that jump had been made slightly earlier, say right after the national championship or when the team was still at the upper echelon of FCS?
Ryan Bamford brought that to my attention when we made the move. We'd actually taken a little bit of a slide in terms of SCS success. I hadn't thought about that, to be honest with you. That's when I was at Rhode Island, and so I kind of wasn't as aware or paying as close attention as maybe others would have been. But yeah, I think that's a factor for sure. But far more important than that, in my opinion, is the transition plan that needed to be put in place to allow you to have some success. James Madison was preparing for their move for a long time. I know that because we competed against them for years and they just ran their program differently. They funded it differently. I would argue Delaware did the same thing, where they knew who they wanted to be and where they wanted to get to, and they put together a really solid plan institutionally to allow them to have that success. The University of Massachusetts, I don't believe did. And now that is in place. So we're a little bit delayed in terms of what we hope can be a very successful program, but that's going to take the time. It's going to take some time. So, if we started to do this in 2007 after our national championship runner-up loss, I think it was in 2006, right before I came to URI. Would that have helped? Maybe, but not if the same plan was in place. If the same plan was in place, we'd find ourselves just 5 or 6 years behind the eight ball further. So I think those other factors are big. I really do.
How has it been trying to, and not that these things can be manufactured, but selling rivalries in a new conference as opposed to playing a lot of those old Yankee conference teams. You got the annual Connecticut game and then Rhode Island and Maine back in the day. But now that you're in the MAC, where a lot of the teams are from the Midwest, has that been a challenge trying to brandish these rivalries for people to get excited about?
One of the things that's cool about football is you're almost in a lot of ways, and UMass isn't unique here, is you're selling the day. Opening day, doesn't matter who you're playing, is always exciting. It's cool. It's warm. It's a great time to be on campus. The students are just here, so you're able to attract that. Homecoming, family day, combinations, or band day, however that's rolled into one or two different dates. Those are really exciting ways and when marketed to bring people back. So I think we have to really take advantage of those days. No different than we did at Rhode Island, for example, or even like we did at UMass back in the day. It almost didn't matter who you were playing on those dates. It just mattered that it was part of that really cool fan experience. People wanted to come to be part of that. So we have to make sure that we're hitting on all cylinders there. That's really important. I think anytime you can play a rival, like we're going to play UConn next year, and we have a long-standing contract with them. That's a huge rivalry series for us, and I think that's really important. They're an independent. I said before, they've really done a great job. They have a beautiful stadium. They've done a great job as an institution and being competitive in a challenging independent situation. But obviously this year and the previous years and years before that, they've had some really cool success. The fact that we get to play them is awesome. There's going to be every once in a while there'll be a year that we don't, but I think that's going to be big. And then even, if we're going to play these, different FCS games, which we're going to do every year, one or two, you gotta, we're going to play the local teams because I think that's important because, again, will it still be a rivalry? I don't know. It's local and familiar. And so I think we have to, creatively think about that. I like our scheduling. It's been fun to sort of really get my arms around that and think about strategy and talking to Ryan about strategy and what that could look like. So, any chance you can have, we're trying to work on, and sometimes you have to manufacture, and I don't mean that in a phony way. manufacture rivalries, right? So we've got one with Buffalo that we're working on as the closest back opponent to us. So how do we work on putting something together that in time? Because again, remember what I said before. We played football for 100 plus years. We're going to play for another 100. So you can't just say, all right, we're going to try something. If it doesn't work, we're done. Nope. We're going to try to build things up over time, and we just got to put things in solid position to allow us to do that. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think of URI in the last few years with all the teams jumping into the CAA. I mean, they're playing their annual night game against, say, Campbell or NCA&T, and they have no history, and fans were still excited about it. So I think it's pretty universal with all the conference realignment going on. Um, but another comparison I think of with Rhode Island is that a rivalry could come from something that happens in game. You know, it takes one
Yeah.
matchup and suddenly the blood could get boiling. Like I'm still upset about New Hampshire 4 years ago with the whole phantom catch. Yeah, I feel like I find a way to bring that up every few episodes. We had Kasim Hill on. We had Connor Calden, the photographer of that. I've gone over that countless times. Still bothers me, but ever since then, New Hampshire's been circled in red.
I love it's funny. Every time I meet a kid, a recruit, or whoever, I'll always ask the same, which is probably not very professional, but I'll ask the question like, "Who do you hate?" And then I'll talk about the teams that I hate. I won't tell you who they are, but New Hampshire's not one of them. I always have loved UNH. I love their staff, their coaches, their administration. Maine's the same way. Just love those guys. But that game, oh, it was funny. So we had a recruit on campus from New Hampshire, and we were having dinner, and I asked him about that game, and he goes, "Yeah, okay, we all know that he didn't catch it. We know that. But how about the next year when all of a sudden you had two scoreboards and neither one was working, and we ended up not being able to kick a field goal to go into halftime?" He goes, "Did you do that on purpose?" And I said, "No, I wish I did, but I didn't." And so it's funny how that works out.
Yeah, no, no, it is. I mean, a little different, but yeah, yeah. I can see the comparison. But with Rhode Island, actually, no. First, there was another thought I had because you brought up JMU. Did seeing Kurt Signetti build up both JMU and then Indiana and take them to new heights, does that inspire you in a certain way to see like, wow, like having the right coach can really turn things around? Even I mean, even in the NFL, Mike Vrabel, you've seen more and more in that in sports. Does that give you more optimism about the state of the program here and maybe just how quickly you can build a culture?
I'm Coach Signetti. What he's done at Elon, at JMU, and now is phenomenal, and it just shows you that you know he truly is. If he's not the best college coach in the country, someone will have to convince me who is. I mean, that's just ridiculous what he's done, and especially what he did in Indiana. Taking over a program that had struggled and then turned it around. So the formula is there. Um, no, I think coaching is huge. And that's one of the reasons why it was exciting for me to come here and think about what Coach Harris-Simiak is all about. Seeing him coach as a young coach at the FCS level at Maine and being a game away from the FCS championship, that's pretty cool. And that doesn't just happen. That to me shows that he has a really good sense of running a program. And then working with him for the last 2 months, I've gotten to see that firsthand. So again, I'm always cautiously optimistic because sports are crazy and things happen, but um, I'm very confident going into this year. We'll see. I haven't even seen us practice yet, but I think it's the quality of guys he's brought in, the staff he's brought in. That's terrific. I'm thrilled. I can't wait. Bring on September.
Does it dial up the pressure at all? Now it's been shown, oh, you really can turn a program around that quickly. It gives you optimism, but does it also ramp up the pressure to get things changing faster? Are you still just gonna stay patient?
No, I think my whole career it's been about patience. That's not true. I've learned that you have to be that way. You have to look at building things up in a solid manner. And I'll use Coach Fleming as a perfect example of that. What he inherited was a program that had struggled, right? And then he struggled trying to turn the program around. And it goes back to what I said earlier, until we discovered the why was this not working? What were we doing wrong? Only then were we able to kind of work on it. So I think now, Ryan's been here a long time, which is great as our AD. Administration's been here for quite a while, so they have a good sense. Joe's been around the block, so he really has a good idea of what's needed and what isn't. So, I'm confident that we're gonna, get this thing going in the right direction. I'm not kidding myself. I really believe it with all my heart. I think all the things are in place. If we were going to compete in the SEC, I'd say no, we're not there. We don't have those things in place, but we're playing in a fantastic football league with some really great talent and historic programs. We're funding our budget in a way that should allow us to be competitive at a high level, in my opinion, against those opponents. And we're not relying on other BCS level programs to fund our budget. We are going to play those, and getting the guarantee is great, but that's there's a strategy around that. It's not just a budgetary help fund us type of strategy that I think was in place when this move first took place. So for all those reasons, I couldn't be more excited.
What were some of the answers you found to those why questions back 10 years ago with Rhode Island that led them to where they are now?
Funding for sure. Stadium, I'll give you an example. John Fiore, whose name's on our field, Fiore Field. John and I were having dinner with his wife Sheila. A couple other folks were there too in Pennsylvania before a Villanova game. And I remember saying to him, the biggest thing I think we need to do right now is put in turf and lights at Meade Stadium. And he said, okay, why? And I said, well, the biggest reason, in my opinion, after being there at that time for 13 years, was that we were getting, people were recruiting against us saying, why would you ever go to Rhode Island? They're just going to drop the program. And, so I looked at that as an example, just one example of saying we need to make a statement. We need to make a statement about we're going to make investment in our football stadium. And that should alleviate some of that commentary. So we did. It was a $4 million initiative. John and Sheila were huge supporters. Jim Clappin and Doreen Clappin were huge supporters, as was the campus. And student affairs put money towards it with the idea that no longer was it going to just be used 6 times a year, but it could be used 300 times a year. And what I believe in all my heart, that statement, because not only was it donor funded, there were $3 million, two $1 million gifts, and then a number of guys that came up with another million, and then the university, we were able to make a statement where, pick your favorite CAA school. I'm smiling because I know who they are, who are saying, why would you go to Rhode Island? They're just going to drop their program. Well, you know what? Now they couldn't say it anymore. One small example of saying, okay, where's a problem? Let's try to fix it. It took investment. And then we looked at it and said, okay, great. This is one thing. I'll even back up further. The weight room, when we built that in 2013. And then when we made sure that even though we struggled a little bit, we realized Jim Fleming was not the problem. Jim Fleming and his staff were not the problem. So when maybe people would say, hey, after 5 years of struggle, why don't you make a coaching change? Well, he's not the problem. Let's give him the resources he needs to be successful and let him see what he can do. Well, look what he's done since then. To me, he's a Hall of Fame coach at the university. Not to me. He is a Hall of Fame coach at the University of Rhode Island. And that's pretty darn cool. And in part because he was given that time, because, he inherited a program that, looking back, we certainly underfunded, under facilitated, under scholarship, and then those changes were made. And then what was really exciting is that once the success started coming, we didn't just sit back on the laurels and say, okay, we're good, great, that's all good. We're on to the next thing. No, it was like, how do we maintain this? How do we keep growing it? How do we, people, we're now the hunted and the chased. So again, I think about that model at Rhode Island and think about it. And then you add in the Meade Stadium project. Huge thank you to the governor and to the speaker and to the Senate president and Mark Parlage, who really drove that. That's a huge statement, and that gets people excited. It just tells them we care. We care. And so to go back a little bit back onto the $30 million investment around UMass facilities, you know what? Telling recruits and telling fans you care is important. And how do you do that? You do that through funding and through facility upgrades and through renovations. No different than how important it is to do the same thing on campus and show that the academic areas are so important. They are. And the Fine Arts Center and Campus Center and all those other things, they're all important. And if we're going to say that, we're going to be world class as an institution, which UMass is, which URI is, you've got to make those investments. And kudos to the leaders that have done that in the past.
I often forget how recent some of those things were to when I got there. Like my first game was a night game, uh filming, and I didn't realize it was only like the second game in the stadium's history at night, or I didn't even realize until now how new the weight room was. So those do make a huge difference to the point where I even overlooked it. It's funny. I think of myself as sort of a Marcus Smart of Rhode football because I was there just as they were really taking that step, but I was a year behind the championships, so I didn't get any rings to show for it. But I mean, you left that team in a great position. And for the basketball team, you oversaw the hiring of Dan Hurley, and now the team's kind of hit a lull. How do you feel about the place you left Rhodey men's basketball?
Great question. I think Archie Mills is a great coach. I don't think he's a good coach. I think he's a great coach. I think what no different than identifying the why that we did before, when Dan was here and when Dan was hired, and you look at the transformations that were made in close, connection between he and I and Dave Dooley at the time and Tom Ryan and Mike Fascitelli and others, where you made again, coach really drove the strategic investments that he felt were needed for him to be successful. So we really focused on those areas and got the dollars almost all exclusively fundraised to make those enhancements. When Dave Cox was hired, he did a great job, and in that certainly in the first couple of years, and then COVID hit. That COVID year, I still think we could have made the NCAA tournament. We would have had to
100%.
get to the finals but with Jeff Dowden and Cyril Langevin, I mean, Fats, I just think we could have done it. We were good enough, and then, the following year we struggled a little bit. And as I look back, it kind of goes into what you were saying, making sure that the programs are funded in a way to be successful. When Archie was hired, Archie was a awesome hire. I was so excited, and again, kudos to the president, Parlange, and kudos to Margot Cook and Tom Ryan and Mike Fascitelli and Armin Sabatoni, who were all part of those conversations. They allowed me to make the investments we needed to put ourselves in the best position. Now, what changed? NIL, and NIL is real. And I remember the first time Archie came into my office and we started talking about it and how that transformed like 500 miles an hour. As an institution, you or I made some investments, but those investments need to continue to grow in order to give a coach an opportunity to be successful. I know where URI is in the grand NIL scheme of the Atlantic 10. Um, and without getting into a lot of details, there's reasons why it's hard. Now, this basketball team that he has this year is made up of some of the most amazing guys. Not just saying it, first class. They're talented, they're wonderful, but they're also great community leaders and campus leaders and so forth. They're just wonderful people. So I watch I watch every URI men's and women's basketball game that I can watch if we're not playing here at UMass because I love what Tammy's done. I love what Archie's done. I feel like there's always, investments that have to be made. And at the end of the day, you got to win. I get that. Archie gets that. We all do. It makes it a challenge, but because as I like to say, the other team's always trying to win too, and we sometimes forget that. But I think Archie's a great coach, and I think the guys he's brought in are really important. And continued support at the NIL level is going to be critical to until Congress steps in and sets up parameters. But the parameters aren't going to impact the Atlantic 10. The parameters are going to impact Ohio State and Texas. They're not going to. By that, I'm going to talk about certain caps and so forth, but. If there was a way to put some regulation on, I think, everybody'd be better off.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And I mean, we've talked about some of those coaches you found, and I was going to get into Tammy, who's been on my show before. How did you find her, and how have you felt watching what she's done with this? I mean, it's a pretty straightforward answer there, but just let me know how. I'll put it this way: how on earth did you find her, and did you envision what ended up happening as a result?
Uh, I'm smiling because I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in my office and Shane Donaldson, who you know, walked into my office and he took a piece of paper and he just tossed it on my desk. He said, "This is who we need to talk to." And Shane was always really good about, having a good insight as to different people and what they've done and so forth. And I hadn't been tracking on Tammy at all. And so I reached out to her and and we ended up getting on a phone call. I was driving up to watch softball play at Providence. We talked for probably 45 minutes on the phone. And after a bit, she said, "Hey, I'd like to give you my strengths and weaknesses. I've given you my strengths. I'd like to give you my weaknesses." And she goes, I said, "Okay, fair enough." And she said, "Well, my weakness is I've never been a head coach." And I said, "Well, prior to me being the athletic director here, I'd never really been the athletic director either, other than a short interim stint." And she goes, "I get that, but I want to tell you why. I'll never forget that." She said, "I wasn't ready. Now I'm ready." That assessment, that self-awareness is so unheard of. Nobody does that. And that just like was like a punch in the face of reality. I'm like, wow, that's awesome. I love that. And I flew up to Syracuse and she picked me up at the airport. We went and had breakfast. And when I got, I think when I got back, was when I knew that that was absolutely the person we needed to hire. And then when got to see her firsthand at work and her enthusiasm and the way she embraced the URI community was overwhelming. And she's just such a great citizen of the university and the community. So no, I text Tammy quite a bit, certainly after every game, and I love her. I think she's amazing. She's a great friend and someone that I know is another Hall of Fame coach. She's just a superstar. The fact that she's the all-time leader in URI wins now in a relatively short period of time is incredible. She took over a program that was really struggling for years and wasn't winning a lot of games. And now the expectation is you're going every year to try to compete for a championship. And that I have a huge spot of pride there for her and the program.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure when she came on my show a few months back, she was mentioning a relationship with you playing a huge role in why she's stuck around because she could have gone back to her alma mater. She could have had any job she wanted, but she chose to stay, and then Rhode Island's all the better for it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we are better as a result of it, or the school is, and it's also now at that stage, and Jim Fleming's the same way, where they can really they've built a legacy and they can keep building upon it. And sometimes that only happens with time, and you got to put the time in. It's funny. I think about Marquise Buchanan and Devin Farrell. I mean, same thing. They can build on legacies, which when you're 30, 40, 50, 60 years old you don't realize how cool that is. I'm not going to say important. I'm just going to say cool. When you can go back and think about what you did throughout your time and impacting a certain place, and they've all done that. There's so many others that have done it too, but just off the top of my head, it's really amazing.
Do you have a similar story as to how you found Dan Hurley, who goes without saying is one of the top college basketball coaches in the country now?
Yeah, I do. I knew he's who I wanted. He was at Wagner. Mike LaPre, who was our media relations guy at the time, he came in with a piece of paper and had Dan's cell phone on it. And so I texted Dan. He was still playing, and I didn't know him. Obviously, I never talked to him. But I ended up texting him, and he had lost in I think the conference finals or semifinals of the Northeast Conference Tournament Championship. And I was down in Atlantic City with the men's basketball championship. And as I'm driving back up, from the tournament, I ended up meeting him at this diner in Jersey, someplace that he picked out. And we sat there for about 3 hours and just talked. And and it's funny. It was just I just knew again. I really liked him. I knew I knew about him, but I was excited. I was excited, and the next week or so was a challenge as we were navigating it. I didn't realize what it meant to him to make a decision to leave a team, how real that was, and how hard that was for him. But it just shows the type of person he is, and then over the next 6 years to I have a picture of me hugging Cyril Langevin when we won the A10 championship. And it was a hug almost the same way I did with Jim Fleming when we won the CAA co-championship up at Bryant a couple years ago. It's just all this relief and emotion just comes flying out uncontrollably because you know how much time and energy and grief and criticism you take. And then when all of a sudden it just works, it's one of the most rewarding feelings you can ever have. And so yeah, I remember that time with Dan, and I remember, the relationship. I think about the relationship we built over that time and continued. It's not like we talk all the time now, but I know he's one of those guys that if I said I need your help, he'd be there. And that's the person he is. And Andrea, his wife, is one of the biggest, greatest sweethearts out there. She's strong, tough, loving, kind, warm, and loves URI. So, anytime anybody mentions, any of those people we just talked about, I can't help but smile.
I think you and him have something in common. Both of you seem to be builders. You like building up a program, and I mean, you certainly did that at Rhode Island with multiple sports. I mean, I didn't even get into track and field with all the championships they won, and now you're going to get a chance to do it again. But are you going to miss having more of a role in all the different sports? I know you still interact with them and handle some logistical things with them, but from what I understand, your main football or focus is football there, right?
Yeah, you're right, Andrew, and that's something I really had to think a lot about because I think my experience at URI and what I loved so much about it was the connection with the different students, all the student athletes. And I say this all the time. The way URI is set up with the Ryan Center and Tutel and Keeney Gym and Mackle, it's awesome how it's all connected. So you really have the ability to interact with different teams every day, all day. And we don't have that here, because we're kind of spread out in different places. So I think what that means for me is to be proactive and make sure I'm at games, swing by practices. I if I'm here, I'm going to be at every men's basketball game, women's basketball game, hockey game. Try to get to practice once in a while to watch and get to know the student athletes. I'm excited about lacrosse and softball and baseball getting started and track and the facilities are all sort of right around me, and so I get to go. I'll be able to get to go to games, and I've gotten to know the coaches a little bit. So yeah, to answer your question, of course, that'll be harder. But it's gonna be something I missed because that was special at Rhode Island.
What will your role with those teams look like, even though it's a diminished one?
I think in part it'll be a high level administrative support. Where can I be helpful when as it relates to um, the external side, communications people who are great. They don't need me babysitting them by any stretch. They're pros, real pros. Marketing staff, same thing. NIL work, same thing. I think the way I've been sort of describing even my role with football is I'm sort of treating it like, being the athletic director, but just for football. But I always want to clarify that's Ryan is the athletic director, right? He's the role I had at Rhode Island, but at the end of the day, having that daily interaction with football is something that I haven't been able to do for a long time. And so I'm actually embracing that and excited about that. And, getting to know these guys probably much closer. I got to know the UMass or the URI football team pretty well and the basketball guy. I got to know a lot of them very well. So I just know for me here, it's going to be my responsibility to be very proactive and be visible and be out there. And it's what I love to do anyway, so that's okay.
Yeah, no, it works out perfectly. Making the switch for the schools, how long did that decision take, and how long did you take to think about it, and what were some of the factors that came into your mind when you were making the decision to go back home?
It was there was a few things. I think The first one was 18 and a half years. I was really happy. I just signed a new contract in July. Mark Prolonge was not only my boss and president, but he became a really, really close friend. I loved our staff who we worked with, and I loved our students, and I loved the culture that we had built. And so when Ryan called me about my interest in this opportunity, I went home and talked to my wife about it, and I said, I think I'm really interested in this. I think I'm really excited about this. Now, personally, we have two of our three daughters live in Rhode Island. Our two grandsons live in Rhode Island, so we knew we were going to keep our house in Rhode Island. But we also know this area so well. We rented a place up here, and 4 miles from campus, and have a lot of friends here, and a lot of connections, and know all the back roads to get to campus. So, I wouldn't have done this anywhere else. And I know people say that all the time. I get that. But there is no shot I would have left URI for any other opportunity than this one. And I had received great advice from a really good friend who had been an AD at a couple places and then was just more in higher ed administration. And he gave me the best advice that I've told a bunch of people. He said, first and foremost, you're going to have to figure out the commute part. And we did that. Cindy and I figured that out, and that's been going just fine. And then the other part is your identity. He said you've been an AD for 18 and a half years. And so you got to think through, how's that going to impact you? And he said, but his advice, which it seems so simple, but in my brain, it made perfect sense, was think about URI as an 18 and a half year game. The game's over. You won the game. Now it's time for a new game. And I went, wow, that was perfect. And so for me, that was all I needed to think about and hear. And then over the next 2 or 3 weeks, Ryan and I got together and talked a bit and kept it very quiet. And it had to be something that was absolutely perfectly right for us, and perfectly right for UMass. And just kind of felt like it was. And so it just was something that was a very exciting thing. And I love this football program. It provided me my education. Then the university allowed me to break into my career here for 13 years at two different stints. Um, it's kind of amazing to think about. So I'm just grateful. But that doesn't diminish my URI time. That is a special place that I am so grateful for, and the people, and the student athletes, and the coaches, and the administration. Yeah, and my kids all went to school there. That's a special place. I leave there with nothing but love, that's for sure.
How would you like Rhode fans to remember your time?
Wow, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that. I hope, as someone who cared, someone who loved our students, um, I hope people would look back and say maybe it's a little bit better than 2007. Um, and that the culture is really strong, and that we know, we've got proper perspective. You're there to get a great education, to represent the university in a first class manner, and to win championships. And when I think about being a part of 41 different championships during my time, that's a great tribute to our coaches and our kids and our donors and the university. And yeah, I have. I hope I hope they smile. I gotten to know a lot of them. For those that I made angry, I'm sorry. Those that didn't agree with all my decisions or recommendations, I apologize. Kinda, maybe not. But no, I will always look back with such a huge amount of gratitude for those 18 and a half years. It's a special, special place to me, and to Cindy, and to our kids, and I'll never forget it. Even my grandson Jack, he's only 3. He's funny. I said, Jack, you gonna come to a football game up here at UMass? Oh, got to go to see Rhode. So I got work to do. I definitely got work to do.
And lastly, what do you want UMass fans to look forward to from you? What do you want them to expect from you?
Same thing that they got the last 2 times I was here. Approachability, caring, someone that's gonna put in the time and energy, and provide. Now, what I think though, yeah, so those things are really important, and I've gotten that feel and that vibe from seeing so many people since I've been back. Um, but I like to think now, Maybe if there's value I can bring, it's 18 and a half years of being in that chair. There's really nothing that can surprise me. Now, that doesn't mean I see everything. I'm not saying that. I like to describe my first, 6 months at URI as drinking from or not drinking from a fire hose, trying to hit 300-mile-an-hour fastballs. And if I ever tipped one off, I was happy. To where now things are like slow pitch softballs. Nothing surprised. You've seen so much. Now, you may not have seen that one specific thing, but I've been through tough football seasons. I've been through tough basketball seasons. I've been through times when fan bases are apathetic. I've been through times when fan bases are excited. So, those are things that you have to realize that I'm not going to get too high and I'm not going to get too low. That's a cliche, but it's real. I learned that over time. Again, I hope as much as I want to deliver for our fan base and our alums, my model has always been how do we deliver for our students first, our student athletes, and that's not going to change. That's what they're going to get from me.
Well, I am thrilled that I got to have my college years be at the end of your tenure when a lot of the building was already done and a lot of the benefits of all your work were coming out to us students. I Sports performance was very important to me. I wanted to have some sort of sports team, one of them at least do well, and I was privileged to see multiple of them do well and gotten the chance to work behind the scenes with a lot of them. Which that's another thing you built up. You did a great job of helping the sports media program get
Thank
on the
you.
ground, and I should have touched on that earlier, but you gave me a lot of experiences, and I'm grateful. I'm sure all Rhody fans are grateful. I've heard a lot of, oh shoot, we've got to find the next Thorr. That's going to be a challenge. But I know that UMass fans are in great hands with you. I'm going to be watching the UMass football team, see how they do, and hope the best for you. And I think they're in very, very capable hands now. And it's great talking to you again. You're a great interview and great at what you do. And I look forward to staying in touch with you. And thanks again for coming on.
Oh, Andrew, you're amazing. I'm grateful that you reached out, and I wish you all the best. And no, you are a great tribute to the program that you were part of, and your hard work and commitment and love of and passion that you show in everything you do certainly comes off. So very grateful for our friendship, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Thorr. And thank you all for watching. Keep an eye on the social media. I'm talking to several potential guests now. Very exciting stuff. And I will be posting about it as I get more details. But this has been a long time in the works, and I'm glad we finally got it out. And it was a great conversation. Thorr, thanks again. And for all of you watching, thank you so much. This is Fiore calling game.